So the topic I'm going to try to address today is the relationship between liberal and mechanical arts, and it's one I've been talking about a fair amount for a while now. The process a few years ago of helping out with the academic excellence work for St. Greg's new strategic plan when I was still teaching at OSU. After several years of trying to update the approach I took to comp pedagogy at OSU and integrate the teaching of intellectual virtues, the development of a real capacity to handle significant content, as well as basic argumentative rhetoric skills. This has all left me with an essential problem that I find really hard to address within any of our current education circles. I find that we seem to grind down into uncertainty, being stuck between well-worn ruts to either side of a question that really has to have an integrative answer, an answer that actually figures out what the thing itself is and builds out from there, touching on the various camps and schools of thought more or less in an a la carte or ad hoc way. On the one hand, a lot of my people who I regard as my friends and close allies in liberal arts circles seem to think of liberal arts as strictly a phenomenon of a contemplative life, of a leisured life, and kind of address its priorities in a way that raises the Platonic mode, the most qualitatively abstract principle, up as the most significant principle in any given education situation. From that perspective, it's actually very hard to put together a package of education that is anything but a luxury good for those who are able to afford it. And it's really hard to put together a mode of education that actually infuses those principles tangibly in a way that you can be sure is working, in a way that you can confirm and optimize your strategies for into any actual situation of teaching. And because of that, we frequently find ourselves at a loss or simply having to play institutional power games, which is always a loss in education. When confronted with people for whom a mistaken empiricism, mistaken objectivity, leads them to treat the quantitatively abstract, anything you can put a percent sign on, as automatically more relevant, more meaningful, as a higher level of explanation or a more significant result than anything qualitatively abstract. So we end up with situations where people who are talking about the necessity for students to be educated in a space that provides for significant room for silent contemplation, that insists that students be directed to read great works of literature and art in an extended and slow fashion, and insists that this intangibly shapes the character of students in a way that ought to make them better people in any walk of life, are trying to persuade people who look at year-over-year retention statistics and say, you know, Plato's no good if he doesn't give me 5 more graduations this year. In both cases, it seems that we're missing the question of what I take to be our model student, which is really the plumber who can talk about Aristotle. And that's a bit of a cartoon, but it's not a bad one. The goal isn't to create a hunger for the ability to sit around and keep reading great works all the time and to create a dynamic which a lot of us who are academics and intellectuals do suffer from, where anything that isn't reading great books and discussing them is a compromise, is a loss, is a cost we pay to pay the bills. And there will always be those of us with that disposition, but one can't build education on that disposition. That's just what that becomes quickly what Nietzsche calls ressentiment, the kind of institutionalization of a clerisy for the purpose of protecting its own preferences and prerogatives. And wrong as he is about that being the foundation of many things, it's still a dynamic to be avoided when we see it. And similarly, our Aristotle quoting Plummer is not the least bit helped by having been rushed through a system that attempts to figure out what it takes to get him to graduate and to achieve plumbing certification and 3 other certificates, none of which have given him the ability to carry around in his head the furniture of a robust and humane life. I would suggest that the liberal arts already, and the mechanical arts too, if we attend to the etymology of mechanical, that the liberal arts and the mechanical arts have already supplied, as Hugh of St. Victor would tell us in his De Discalicon, the key we need to understanding their relationship. It's true that the liberal arts have often been set over against the servile arts, and the mechanical arts are sometimes called that because of the kind of split that I think we need to try to get away from. But the liberal arts and the mechanical arts are the arts proper to human freedom, and the arts that recognize the admixture of ends and means, the admixture of time and effort with things, the admixture of pure forms with material substance. And because mechanical arts are mixed, we do recognize that the liberal arts are, in a sense, closer to the summit. At the same time, mechanical arts are closer to the foundation. Mechanical arts are necessary if we are to have the food with which to fuel the brains, which is, as it were, contemplate the divine essence until we have, first, less body, and second, much more perfect bodies in the death and the resurrection. So while we still need bodies to be fueled, we still need ability to pay the bills. We need to be able to take care of families if we're going to have them. We need to do all of those things. And in the same sense as there's no charity in contemplating one's beloved without providing food for one's family, there's no liberal arts without a articulate relationship to the mechanical arts. They simply cannot be treated as a concession to pragmatics. So how do we unfold that relationship? Well, I would argue that when you're looking at the mechanical arts, you're either looking at a pollution or you're looking at a conversion. And this is where I really emphasize the need to have a more Aristotelian and Thomistic understanding, to be careful how much we let a certain strain of interpretation of St. Augustine, a certain Platonic tendency and a Boethian tendency, too much dominate our conception of liberal arts. Because as embodied creatures, we're not designed to fundamentally escape the body through contemplation, but rather we realize the goal of bodily activity in contemplation, and contemplation in turn permits us to rationally and sanely proportion and set the direction for our bodily activity. And this is where, at one point, I think we really need to pin down. Study and teaching are not elements of the contemplative life. In our necessary reflection on leisure, we often turn leisure into itself contemplation. We turn contemplation into all mind activity. This is because the modern mind-body division, the dualistic tendency that constantly threatens us in Western thought, is tricking us into automatically saying that where contemplation happens, activity can't. And in fact, we want to expand, we have a habit of expanding the domain of contemplation to include all, as it were, quiet or all non-demonstrative or all non-utilitarian or non-commercial or non-menial activity, when in fact these are activities. Any teacher can tell you that teaching is an active thing, and the sense that teaching and study are contemplative leaves a lot of educators exhausted and depressed because they set out on a pace of life and with an expectation, and with, more to the point, the expectations of all those around them, that what they are doing is essentially a quiet, an alternative to a robust active life, the kind of thing that is, lighter than others. Well, in fact, while teaching is not menial labor, teaching, though it has menial labor, we call it grading and committee work and things like that, that teaching is not manual labor, which many of us could simply not do for very long. Teaching is active. One is, while in the classroom, constantly pouring out energy, attempting to ascertain what students are responding and to anticipate responses, to anticipate questions. One is constantly attempting to recall material that's been studied and bring it into relationship with the moment. Outside the classroom, we're constantly dealing with the grading, again, the committee work, organizing work, and there's many respects. Teaching is simply not contemplative. One gets those moments, but it is not really like that. Even scholarship is not really like that. And again, many an aspiring scholar fails to be a scholar because actual scholarship requires organizing of notes, it requires attending conferences, it requires participating in learned societies, it requires all sorts of activity, not least the tedium of actually changing paragraph to paragraph in writing. It's simply not the case that scholarship is contemplative leisure. Scholarship is active, and it's either occupational or leisure, depending on how you structure your life. But so it's very important. We need to understand that the active life and the contemplative life interlock in a more complex way than we sometimes treat. And then we need to understand that contemplation is not a luxury. Contemplative living is simply not the sort of thing that can be reserved for a class that can afford it, or is reserved for those who have, because they've vowed poverty or because they've joined a community and given up private property, that they are now free from enough active obligations to spend time in contemplation. That's the advantage of those things if one seeks them in order to enlarge one's scope for pure prayer, for pure contemplative activity, for extended time for private and communal meditation and reflection. If that's what one does, then one secures more leisure and therefore may secure more opportunity for truly contemplative life. But as Aquinas points out, even in such a state, one is frequently called into the active from the contemplative life. And the reason one does is that one still lives in the world. And charity with God and one's fellow man simply requires activity, providing for the community, providing for the family, for those of us who are married and lay, and so forth. There's all of these specific requirements that attach. So what we end up needing is a understanding of contemplation and action that allows us to not only to put study and teaching in the proper active side of that, but then to articulate how do study and teaching and other kinds of the active life relate to the contemplative life, and how do study and teaching help to relate all of those different forms of the active life to the contemplative life. And so the structure I suggest is that when we look at any form of human activity, whether it's the most kind of abstractly philosophical or the most assertively concrete, when we look at, a 40-year-old plumber who stops on his lunch break and reads Aristotle's Poetics because of a comment his son made about the Freytag pyramid and how it comes from Aristotle. And he's just hunting through to figure out what his son was talking about. The capacity to do that, there's no reason that capacity cannot be enlarged and renewed consistently in any walk of life. Sure, the time is a complication for everyone, but the capacity, the habit of doing that can be nourished, it can be cultivated, it can be taught to the extent that aptitude can be built on it, made to flourish. The challenge then is to look at how one uses both one's occupational time and one's leisure time, and to ask whether this activity or that activity tends to secure and to promote for others goods that are not convertible into contemplation of the good, or whether it secures goods that are convertible into that. A simple example I like to use: one mows the lawn. If the lawn doesn't get mowed, and having a bum knee, my lawn goes a long time between mowings. If the lawn doesn't get mowed, then there's an aesthetic problem. There's also a problem of insects. There's a problem that has to do with our culture's communication of care and cultivation and of one's own resources, of the goods of the neighborhood. There's any number of reasons that one mows the lawn. And when one has mowed the lawn, one is wise to pause for a moment, look at the lawn, and appreciate the results of one's labors. That moment of appreciation, of looking at it and saying, this is good, breathes along with the action of the Creator. It resonates with that. And in any number of ways that we cultivate and contribute to the good of others, we are able to more fully participate in the act of our own creation. The way that God made us to be in the world is more fully manifested by our acts when we do certain things. And our ability to appreciate that, to look at that with gratitude and enjoyment, is an important element in the chain that draws us into friendship with God. It's an important link. It's an important part of the unfolding of God's act of creation, whereby we are capable of apprehending God in part because we participate in the Creator's act of creation in that way. And so being able to appreciate the lawn when it is mowed is similar to contemplation. In a manner of speaking, it is contemplative action. And that requires being able to mow the lawn. We need to be able, as educators, to strengthen the capacity to mow the lawn, and to do so with a commitment and a conviction that is expressed in the manner of our teaching, in not just a vague attitude about our teaching, but specifically in the pedagogy and in the ordering and organization of what we teach. We need to teach the unfolding of mowing the lawn for the purposes of common goods, of promoting common goods, of securing certain goods, and contemplating the mown lawn for the purpose of actually realizing those goods in ourselves and for others. So when we can teach that, we're doing the job. If we teach a contemplation of having mowed the lawn that does not actually secure how to mow the lawn, we have not done our job as educators. And that is what our quantitative hang-up brethren are often half right about, even when they are making arguments that make little sense. But if we measure all of our success by teaching people to mow lawns and treat that as wholly the work of the educator, and teaching people to understand the goods for which they mow lawns and the ability to properly enjoy the mowing of the lawn or the mown lawn, then we derange education. Then the choice of activities becomes not just arbitrary, but driven by winds hostile to the very purposes for which one learns to mow the lawn. Obviously, if the number of lawns that get mowed becomes the metric of success, then this is a great thing for the makers of lawnmowers and the makers of gasoline and purveyors of electricity and so forth. And if that is the metric of success, you can rely on some irrational structures of lawns and some irrational definitions of mowing and even mower design. You can rely on it being perverted by that. Why? Well, because we've lost the fundamental boundary of this, which is what are the goods secured by having a mown lawn? What are the goods of a lawn? For what purpose does one enjoy such a thing? Without that capacity to realize what one has done and enjoy it, to contemplate it and judge it good, one loses the capacity to secure the real goods of the thing, and instead simply secures the means to secure more means because the ends are never in view. So this is the complication we face, is how to do that in particular courses, and that will affect which areas of study an educator chooses to spend time working on. It will affect what direction schools should go. It will require a lot of careful, clear, step-by-step articulation of some things that often we prefer to simply sit in our own corner and attempt to defend our turf over. And it will require, I would suggest, a movement away from a sort of romantic, platonic pedagogy in the direction of a more Aristotelian and Thomistic pedagogy.